You're standing behind a folding table at the farmer's market at 9:15 on a Tuesday morning, 3 jars of your own honey lined up next to a hand-lettered sign, chatting with a regular customer about whether this year's batch tastes more like clover than last year's did. A light breeze keeps trying to knock over the sign, and you've wedged a smooth river rock against the base of it that's worked well enough for 3 weeks running. The market only runs Tuesdays and Saturdays, and Tuesday mornings are usually thin. A handful of retirees, a couple of remote workers on a coffee break, nobody in any particular hurry. You're in no hurry either, which is the part that would have seemed impossible to you 18 months ago. Somewhere across town, at 9:15 on a Tuesday morning, your old team is sitting through the weekly production meeting, the same one you sat through for 9 straight years. The same conference room with the projector that's never quite lined up right. Someone probably still fighting with the HDMI cable the way people always were. Not one person in that room has any idea you're standing at a folding table selling honey to a woman deciding between clover and wildflower. That's the whole secret nobody tells you about actually getting out. It doesn't come with an announcement, it comes with a Tuesday morning exactly like this one, and the specific, quiet realization that nobody back there has even noticed you're gone in any way that matters to your life anymore. It started at a work happy hour, of all places, 7 years ago. You were 31, a graphic designer at a mid-size print and signage company. 3 drinks into a Friday you don't remember much else about, when a coworker named Petra mentioned, almost in passing, that she and her husband had calculated their number, the amount they'd need invested before their jobs became optional rather than required. You'd never heard anyone use the phrase that way before, like it was a real, calculable thing rather than a fantasy, and you found yourself asking her 3 follow-up questions before the appetizers even arrived. You went home that weekend and ran your own version on the back of a napkin, then again more carefully on your laptop once the napkin's math started looking almost plausible. 25 times your annual spending, the standard rough formula. Your spending at the time ran close to $38,000 a year, which put the number at $950,000. You remember laughing out loud in your apartment, alone, because you had $6,200 in savings and a 5-year-old Kia with a check engine light you'd been ignoring since spring. The number felt like something from a different life entirely, attached to a person who made considerably more money than a graphic designer at a regional print shop ever would. You didn't quit that year, or the next. What you did was smaller. You increased your 401k contribution to capture your full employer match, which you'd somehow never gotten around to in 3 years at the company, a form that took you 11 minutes to fill out once you actually sat down and did it. You opened a Roth IRA and set an automatic transfer of $400 a month, timed 2 days after each paycheck. You kept the Kia instead of upgrading it, kept your 1-bedroom instead of moving somewhere nicer, and let your savings rate climb, almost by accident, to somewhere around 41% within the first year. Nobody at the print shop noticed any of it. Your Instagram, if anyone bothered checking, mostly showed photos of your niece's birthday parties and a growing collection of houseplants you'd started accumulating on the windowsill above your desk. Somewhere around year 4, you crossed your first $250,000 in invested assets, and you remember marking the occasion in a way that felt entirely fitting for how the whole journey had gone. You and your partner split a $9 bottle of decent wine on your apartment balcony, toasted quietly, and went to bed at a normal hour. No trip, no big purchase, no announcement to anyone, just a small, private acknowledgement that the napkin number had gone from a joke to something unmistakably real. 3 years after that, somewhere around $700,000, you didn't even notice the milestone until you happened to glance at the account a full 2 weeks after it had already crossed the mark. You handed in your notice on a Wednesday morning, 7 years and 2 months after that napkin math, sitting across from your manager Renee in her small office with the blinds that never fully closed. You'd rehearsed the conversation more than you'd like to admit, expecting some kind of moment, surprise, maybe a little drama. What actually happened was that Renee nodded, said the design team had been running smoothly enough lately that the timing wasn't terrible, and asked if you could finish the Hendrix account rebrand before your last day. 11 minutes, most of it about font licensing. You went back to your desk after that meeting and finished the Hendrix logo revisions you'd been putting off because they were due that afternoon regardless of what had just happened. And because there was something oddly satisfying about closing out a career on an ordinary, competent Wednesday rather than some dramatic final scene, the 2 weeks between the notice and your last day passed in a surprisingly pleasant blur. You trained your replacement, a sharp, slightly nervous designer named Miguel, who kept apologizing for asking too many questions, and found yourself genuinely enjoying handing off 7 years of institutional knowledge to someone who was clearly going to do the job well. Your last day, 2 weeks later, involved a grocery store cake with slightly too much frosting, and a card that circulated the office with the usual assortment of "We'll miss you" messages in different colored pens. Your coworker Colette, who sat at the next desk over for 6 years, hugged you and said, half joking, "Must be nice, whatever you've got lined up." You told her the truth, no new job, nothing lined up, just done, and watched her decide, visibly, that you were being modest about something more impressive than you were letting on. She patted your arm and went back to her desk because the 9:15 meeting was starting in 3 minutes, and there wasn't time to sit with an answer that didn't fit a normal category. You drove home with the windows down, and the strange specific thing you noticed almost immediately was how light you felt. Not relief exactly, something closer to pure, uncomplicated amusement at how anticlimactic the whole thing had been. You sat at a red light grinning for no particular reason, and the driver next to you glanced over like she wondered what was funny. Nothing was funny. Everything was a little. You'd just quietly arrived somewhere you'd been walking toward for 7 years, and the entire world kept driving past it without noticing a thing. The rumor mill at the print shop did what rumor mills do, and within about a month, 3 different explanations for your departure had made their way back to you through a mutual friend still working there. The first was that you'd inherited money from a distant relative, which was news to your entirely alive and unremarkable extended family, most of whom were still arguing about who was hosting Thanksgiving. The second was that your partner had landed some enormous promotion, which made your partner laugh hard enough to need to sit down when you told them. The third, and your personal favorite, was that you'd secretly been running an online business nobody had heard about, which felt generous even though it wasn't remotely true. You found the whole thing genuinely entertaining rather than annoying. There was something delightful about being a small, harmless mystery to people you'd sat 15 feet away from for years. Colette apparently kept a running, half-joking list of theories going for a couple of months, according to Miguel, your replacement, who mentioned it to you over the one lunch you'd had with him since leaving. Your favorite addition to the list, added sometime in month 2, was that you'd become a competitive poker player, which struck you as so specific and untrue that you almost wished it were real. The actual answer? That you'd saved a high percentage of an entirely ordinary graphic designer's salary for 7 years, with no windfall, no secret side hustle, nothing more dramatic than an automatic transfer and a stubborn refusal to upgrade the Kia. Didn't fit any story anyone wanted to tell. It's not that the truth was embarrassing, it's that it was almost too undramatic to be believed. I set up a transfer in 2018 and left it alone isn't a plot twist, even though it's the entire explanation. Your neighbor Otto eventually figured it out, mostly because he actually asked instead of guessing. He caught you in the driveway on a random Wednesday afternoon, clearly not dressed for an office, watering a small herb garden you'd started keeping by the porch steps, and asked, genuinely curious, what your actual situation was. You told him plainly, the number, the years, the boring mechanics of it. He went quiet for a second, the way people do when a piece of information rearranges something, and said, "So you didn't win anything. You just stopped spending like everyone told you to." That's about as close to the truth as anyone's gotten. You didn't win, you just declined to play the version of the game that was going to take the longest to finish. Renee called you 4 months after you'd left, on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, while you were in the middle of checking a hive frame in your backyard, bee-suit half-zipped, genuinely absorbed in something that had nothing to do with deadlines. She'd gotten approval to bring you back at a meaningfully higher salary, a promotion to senior designer that had apparently opened up, and wanted to know if you'd consider it. She said it kindly, clearly expecting the offer to land as a big deal worth taking a few days to think over. You didn't need time to think it over. You laughed, not at Renee, at the sheer mismatch between what she was offering and what you already had. You thanked her, told her it was genuinely nice to be considered, and explained, still smiling, bee-suit still half-zipped, that you weren't interested in trading your Tuesday afternoons back for anything, whatever number was attached to the offer. She asked, half joking, what exactly you were doing with your Tuesdays instead. You told her the truth, checking on bees, badly, and loving every second of it. She laughed too, said she respected it, and asked if you wanted to grab coffee sometime just to catch up, no job talk required. You said yes and meant it, because leaving the print shop hadn't required leaving the people there behind. Here's the part that would have been unthinkable to the version of you running math on a napkin 7 years earlier. Turning down a real promotion didn't feel like sacrifice. It felt like the easiest decision you'd made all year, delivered with an actual laugh instead of gritted teeth. Your invested portfolio, sitting at roughly $1.02 million the week Renee called, could safely support annual withdrawals of about $41,000 using the same 4% guideline from your original napkin math, comfortably above what you and your partner actually spend, which runs closer to $36,000 a year between the two of you. The gap between what the portfolio can support and what your life actually costs isn't just financial breathing room. It's the entire reason a real promotion sounded to you like someone offering to trade your favorite Tuesday for a version of Tuesday you didn't especially want. You finished checking the Hive frame about 10 minutes after hanging up, gently setting it back in place, and stood there for a second in the afternoon sun admiring the bees going about their own version of an unhurried Tuesday. It occurred to you that this was probably the strangest possible symbol of financial independence anyone could have chosen. A wooden frame covered in bees, worth maybe $40 in materials, representing 7 years of decisions that had added up to exactly this kind of ordinary, unhurried afternoon. Nobody photographs the actual texture of this life because it doesn't look like much from the outside, which turns out to be exactly the point. It's sleeping until your body wakes up on its own most days, still strange after 18 months of it being completely normal. It's an elaborate lunch on a random Wednesday, homemade bread, and an actual salad you took real time with, purely because you have the hour it takes and nowhere else to be. It's finishing a whole novel in one sitting on your back patio and feeling like you got away with something. It's calling your mother on a weekday afternoon just because, and having actual time to hear the whole story about her book club's latest disagreement instead of half listening between meetings. It's the beekeeping, which started almost by accident when Otto mentioned a beginner's class at the county extension office, and you signed up mostly out of curiosity, now grown into 2 hives, a modest honey harvest, and a Tuesday market table you never expected to be running. It's your dog, who has apparently decided your new life exists entirely for her benefit, since you're now available for the mid-morning walk she always seemed to want and never got, and who has developed strong opinions about which route through the neighborhood is acceptable on any given day. It's also the smaller, sillier joys you didn't expect to matter as much as they do. Taking your car in for an oil change on a Tuesday morning and actually finishing a magazine in the waiting room instead of rushing back to a desk. Being the one person at a doctor's appointment who isn't visibly checking the time because there's no meeting to get back to. Just an afternoon that's still entirely yours, no matter how long the wait runs. Watching an entire baseball game on a weekday afternoon, start to finish, with your partner simply because you both happened to be free and neither of you had anywhere else to be. You've noticed, too, how differently ordinary errands feel now that nothing is competing for the same narrow evening window. Grocery shopping on a Tuesday afternoon instead of a crowded Saturday. A dentist appointment that doesn't require negotiating time off or rushing back for a 2 p.m. call. None of it sounds like much described out loud, and that's exactly the point. The accumulated weight of 100 small frictions quietly removed adds up to something considerably larger than any single one of them ever suggested on its own. None of it makes for a good headline. There's no dramatic reveal, no big number flashed on a screen. Your friend Petra, the one who first mentioned the number at that happy hour 7 years ago, still works full-time in a demanding role and told you recently, with real warmth, that watching you build this life quietly changed how she thinks about her own spending. Not because she wants to quit tomorrow, She genuinely likes parts of her job, but because she started asking whether her own spending matched what she actually wanted, or just what everyone around her happened to be doing. She started her own automatic transfer a few months back, small and unglamorous, $350 a month. She told you it felt almost too boring to matter. You told her that was exactly how yours started too. The question you get most, once people get past the inheritance theories and the secret business guesses, is some version of, "But don't you get bored?" It's a fair question, and for a while you genuinely wondered if the answer might eventually be yes. It hasn't been. What you've noticed instead is that boredom was never really about having unstructured time. It was about having unstructured time while still feeling like you owed someone an explanation for how you spent it. That specific anxiety is gone now, and what's underneath it turns out to be something closer to real curiosity, finally allowed to run wherever it wants. You've taken up beekeeping properly, gotten stung more times than you'd like to admit, and produced one batch of honey last summer that was genuinely, unexpectedly good. You volunteer one morning a week at the same county extension office that ran your beginner's class, mostly because Otto mentioned they needed help and you finally had an actual morning to give. You started learning basic woodworking in your garage, ruined 2 pieces of decent lumber, and built one crooked but functional shelf you're disproportionately proud of, the kind of thing you find an excuse to mention in conversation more often than is strictly reasonable. You've also, somewhat to your own surprise, become the person in your friend group everyone asks for honey around the holidays, a small, unglamorous title you never sought and are unreasonably pleased to hold. Through the extension office, you've become genuinely close with a retired biology teacher named Harriet, who's been keeping bees on her own property for over 15 years and has strong, entertaining opinions about hive placement that she shares whether or not anyone asked. None of it is productive in the way the print shop would have measured it. All of it is genuinely satisfying in a way the print shop never quite managed to be. Currently, research on people who reach financial independence consistently finds that the hardest adjustment isn't financial at all. It's rebuilding a sense of identity and purpose outside a job title. And the people who struggle most are usually the ones who never let themselves get curious about anything beyond their career before they left it. You got lucky in one specific way. 7 years of napkin math and automatic transfers gave you 7 years to quietly wonder what you'd actually want to do with unstructured time, long before you ever had to answer the question for real. By the time the question actually arrived, you already had a list. About 6 months into this new life, you and your partner did something that would have been logistically impossible a year earlier. You booked a trip to the coast with 3 days' notice, left on a Monday, and came home the following Thursday. All because a friend mentioned a rental cabin had a last-minute cancellation, and the off-season rate was almost embarrassingly low. There was no vacation request to file, no calendar to check against anyone else's approval, no anxious countdown of PTO days you'd been rationing across the year. You just looked at each other, said why not, and packed a bag that same evening. The town was nearly empty in that particular way off-season coastal towns are. Restaurants with actual availability, a beach you occasionally had entirely to yourselves, except for a woman throwing a tennis ball for an enormous, delighted dog. A used bookstore owner who had time to talk to you for 20 minutes about a mystery novel neither of you had heard of, and both of you ended up loving. You spent one entire afternoon doing nothing more ambitious than sitting on the cabin's small porch reading, moving only to refill your coffee, and it remains one of the better afternoons either of you can remember having, precisely because there was nothing remarkable about it at all. The trip cost you $640 total for the 4 days, cabin included, which was roughly half of what the same trip would have cost during a summer weekend. Back when you'd have been fighting for the same limited days off as everyone else in the country. That's the part almost nobody mentions about a life with this kind of flexibility. It isn't just that you have more time. It's that the time you have falls on different days than everyone else's, which means the beaches are emptier, the flights are cheaper, the cabins have vacancies, and the whole experience of doing something nice costs meaningfully less money for meaningfully more enjoyment. You didn't plan for that specific benefit back at your kitchen table 7 years ago. It turned out to be one of the nicer surprises waiting on the other side of the napkin math. You came home Thursday afternoon, unpacked and were mildly delighted to discover you'd missed absolutely nothing of consequence. The bees had managed fine without you. The dog had been well cared for by Otto's teenage daughter, who you'd hired for a modest fee, and who'd left a surprisingly detailed note about the walk schedule. The world had simply continued along at its normal pace, exactly as it always does, and you'd gotten to spend 4 unhurried days at the coast on a random Monday while it did. You're back at the same folding table a few weeks later. Another Tuesday, another thin morning crowd, the same regular customer debating clover versus wildflower again. The River Rock is still holding your sign against the breeze. You think about Renee's office, with the blinds that never closed right, and Colette still at the next desk over, and the sheet cake with too much frosting, and the sentence you told her that day that she didn't quite believe. Nothing lined up. Just done. You were just going home, 7 years early, to a Tuesday morning exactly like this one. Nobody noticed when you left. Nobody threw a parade for the automatic transfers, or the Kia you never upgraded, or the 7 years of unremarkable Sundays spent nudging a spreadsheet a little closer to a number that once felt like a joke on a napkin. That was never really the deal. The deal was quieter than that, and it turns out to have been worth more than any recognition could have been. You traded 7 years of invisible, ordinary decisions for an entire, unhurried life that belongs completely to you, honey jars lined up on a folding table, sunlight doing whatever it does on a Tuesday morning you'd never once have been free to notice before. You'll pack up the table around noon, same as always, drop the leftover jars at Harriet's on the way home, maybe swing by Otto's to trade honey for a few tomatoes from his garden. None of it will look like much to anyone watching from the outside, which by now feels less like a limitation and more like the entire quiet punchline of the 7-year joke you started at a happy hour you barely remember otherwise. You still don't know exactly what next Tuesday looks like, or the one after that. For the first time in your life, that not knowing feels like the good part.